Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Now, before we get started, I'm going to assume you've either seen the other video on how to use the Army Forge, or you're pretty familiar with it already. All we're going to look at here are the details specific to Warfleets. So if this is your first time ever using the Army Forge, I'd recommend going back and watching my other video that introduces the entirety of the Army Forge to you, and then come back and watch this one to learn about how it applies specifically to Warfleets. So we come back to Army Forge, but instead of picking one of those other games, we pick Warfleets. You'll still get the same screen with all the different factions, and we'll stick with Robot Legion just because I get to pick. You have the same kind of layout here. You'll notice there's not quite as many units as you're used to picking. You still have stats under here, but systems, heroes, titles, weapons looks familiar. Special rules is okay, but we're already starting to see stuff that looks a little bit different. So let's go ahead and create a list. This screen looks the same. We'll start with a small 300-point list because we're just playing around and getting used to this. And again, so far everything looks pretty much the same, but let's start looking over some of the differences here. First, notice up here it says Robot Legion's fleet, and we have a bunch of ships, heavy, medium, light, and then squadrons. And if we keep scrolling, suddenly there's Common Fleet. There are ships that are available to all players no matter what faction they take. These are the common ships. So we're just going to minimize that because we're here to play a Robot Legion's fleet. But you could mix and match. You could just play a generic fleet. That's up to you. But we're going to demonstrate here using the Robot Legions. Now there's lots of different ship types. I'm going to use a couple of them to give you an idea of what they all do. So let's start with a medium ship. Let's take this Dolman ship. And by going through the various stats on the card here, will actually cover a lot of the things that are different about Warfleets. Some things are the same. We see the title. Some of these statistics should look the same. Range, attack, that sounds normal. Toughness, we're kind of used to that, but what's EVA, what's crew, what's MOV, what's strength, all that kind of thing. So let's take a look here. Like previously, click on the ship, and on the right it will bring up the specific details about that unit, but this doesn't look anything like what we're used to. If you'll see here, we have basic stats, but they're not the usual quality and defense. Instead, we have move, which is the movement of the ship in inches if it takes a move action. Next to that, we have CRU for cruise. That's kind of the equivalent of rushing. And notice it's not automatically double. Every ship does not have a base movement, like every model has usually the same 6-inch movement in Grimdark Future. So you have to be very careful to pay attention to your statistics here. So move, cruise is the same as rush. Evasion is the score that your opponent needs to roll to hit your ship when they shoot. So a low evasion is bad. And typically the bigger ships have the lower evasions because they're bulky, they're larger, they're slower, they're easier to hit. Whereas small, fast ships have very, very high evasions because it's hard to shoot them. At the same time, toughness, that's your armor save. That's your defense roll here. So typically the big ships, they have a low evasion roll, which is bad, but they have a low toughness roll, which is good. So in this case, if an enemy ship wants to shoot at my Dolman ship, it needs a 3 or higher to hit, which means it's mostly going to hit, but then I need a 3 or higher to save, which most of the time I'm going to save. We have the basic rules that come with the particular faction, in this case Destroyer and Nexus, but we don't need to know about the specifics. And then underneath you'll notice there's a turret. Every single ship, with very few exceptions, has a standard weapon known as your turret. It has a basic range, basic attacks, that's familiar from the previous video. Strength here is the new AP. So when you're shooting at someone, strength is how much they have to reduce their save by. So in my case, I got a toughness 3. If I'm shot with a strength 1 weapon, that goes up to toughness 4. I'm now saving on a 4+ instead of a 3+. Now this little dot here, that is not a button to add or remove the turret. Instead, that's letting you know that that weapon can shoot in 360 degrees around the ship. It can fire in any direction no matter what way the ship is facing. Other weapons, as we'll see in just a second, don't have that same function. Now under here, you got notes. Now that might seem a little odd too, because we can still change the name of the ship up here if we want to, but down here we can also add notes. One thing I highly recommend doing in fleets is name your specific ships. You don't have to be funky and come up with like names like Harbinger of Destruction, although that's pretty cool. But make sure you can identify your ships, because in a fleet you might have 3 or 4 medium class ships, and they're all going to look the same. So maybe you'll paint on one of them a tiny little red fin or wing, and then down here you'll mark it, this is the red ship, because once your ships start crisscrossing across the board, you are not going to remember which ones are tied to which cards here in Army Forge. So give it some kind of color, give it a number, whatever. That's totally up to you. That's how you're going to customize your army. But I highly recommend either renaming the ship, like Dolman ship, and then put red, or down here in the notes, put red. Okay, now we have these things here. So the Dolman ship has 3 upgrades. Usually, the larger a ship is, light, medium, or heavy, it gets more and more upgrades. A light ship, in my case, you can see down here, light ships have 2 upgrades, medium ships have 3 upgrades, heavy ships have 4 upgrades. They can carry more weapons, more systems, and things like that. So let's start at the bottom here, because everyone loves weapons. We click on weapons, and it brings up, this is starting to look a little bit more familiar, it brings up a list of weapons. And we see range, we see attack, we see strength, or AP, and then we see special rules. But this is a little odd over here. What this is where you're going to mount that weapon on your ship. So, front facing, on the front of the ship, on the broadsides, side facing, or rear facing. And this is important because once that weapon is mounted to the ship, it can only fire in that arc. So if you have a super powerful weapon in your front facing, but some other ship pulls alongside you, you can't hit it. You could hit it with your turret because the turret can shoot 360 degrees. But suddenly, the facing of your ship matters. So let's say, okay, this antimatter cannon, that sounds pretty cool. So we're going to mount that on the front. Now look what happens if I try and put a cascade resonator on the front. You can't. Every facing can only have one weapon, and that includes both sides here. So the disintegrator, if we put that on the side, I can't put the flux accumulator on another side. So you have to pick where you want to put that particular weapon. And just for funsies, let's put the Protocol Covenant here. Let's put that facing the back. So I've got ship weapons all over the place. Front, sides, back. You'll notice this one here, the Rodcaster, I can only put on the side facings because it has a special rule called broadside. So it can't be mounted on the front. Any weapons you have that have restrictions, the square will be grayed out. So that's kind of nice. Okay, so we picked 3 weapons. Let's go back. There they are. We can see them appear on the ship there. And it says our 3 out of 3 upgrades are now satisfied. But what's all this other stuff? Why does it say I have 3 systems when I haven't selected any systems? That's because these upgrades include both weapons and systems combined. So I could put on 3 systems, 3 weapons, 1 weapon and 2 systems, 1 system and 2 weapons. This is where you can add a lot of customization to your ship. Think of your ship as a squad in one of those other games. You have the starting squad of 5 or maybe 10 soldiers, and then you're going to replace one of them and give it a flamethrower, and another one with a missile launcher, and then another one's going to become a medic. That's what you're doing here. Now, while I like a ship that's covered in weapons, I want to see what some of these systems are. So let's get rid of the rear facing because I don't plan on being shot at while I run away. Let's come up here. Notice now it's dropped down 2 out of 3, so we got space for a system. When we click on systems, again, we have common systems and then Robot Legion. We're trying to build a Legion fleet, so let's just close those out. All right, we take a look here and we can select one of these systems because we have 1 upgrade available. They have that specified out here. And I'll talk about that in just a sec. There's one more thing we haven't mentioned. But let's take a look at this. This first one sounds pretty cool. Destruction Engram. Once per activation, the ship can take a morale test when shooting a weapon, and if passed, gets +1 attack. That sounds good to me, so let's take it, and we're good. The little warning that we're out of force organizations disappeared. Over here, the little warning icon has also disappeared. This ship is ready to go. We're back at 3 out of 3 upgrades. We've got our destruction engram. We've got 2 weapons. This ship could be ready to go on the table if we wanted to. But now let's take a look at these things here. Hero and title. Hero, think of that as attaching a character to your ship. And it doesn't, it's not affected by upgrades. See, if we go to the systems here, if we go back in here, notice there's no point values. And when we go to weapons, also no point values. We can take whichever weapons we want. That's because the ship comes with 3 spaces for upgrades, and any ship or any weapon or system can be put in at no extra charge. But if you want to take a hero, now we have to start paying points. Because now we're not just taking a regular ship of the fleet. Now we're putting some seasoned veteran as the captain. We're putting on someone who gives the ship even more special abilities. So look here in this first case. The ship counts as being 6 inches further away when targeted by enemy weapons. That's all right. All friendly ships connected to this one via the Nexus are connected to each other. Okay. This ship and all friendly ships connected to it get +2 to morale tests. Let's go with this one here, the most expensive. I like the idea that enemies have to get closer before they can shoot at me. So we select that. Now the ship is a total of 80 points. And down here you have 3 common heroes which will be available to all factions. So maybe you like these a little bit better. Maybe you want to turn your ship into a carrier, in which case you'd use this hero here. There he is there. There's the points. There he is attached as part of the army card. Now, if we come down to titles, this is literally like naming the ship. You give it some kind of title, but the title carries with it additional benefits. These two you have to pay points for. So this ship can be the Hyperspace Hunter, the Flesh Eater, or it can be the Spider Node. And the Spider Node, I've used this before. This is kind of cool. When activated, roll as many dice as damage on the ship, and for each 6+, remove 1 damage. I've always liked that idea that the Robot Legion self-repairs, that no matter how much damage you do to it, it just keeps fixing itself and coming on. So we're going to do that. We'll take that one. Now let's do a quick check of our force organization here. And you'll notice at 300 points, we can only have 1 hero. So I can't add any to any other ships. We got room for plenty more ships, plenty more squadrons, and 2 copies of any particular ship, meaning 2 medium, 2 light, 2 heavy, what have you. But I can't take any more heroes, so something to keep in mind. Okay, so now we've got our ship completely done. Let's take a look at the complete army view here. And you'll notice this should look mostly familiar. We got our stats across the top here. There's our note that the Dolman ship is red. Down here at the bottom, any of the notes we put in, it's appearing down there too. We've got our 4 stats. We've got all of our different special weapons, but then we got these little boxes. Those boxes are your health. As you engage in battle, as your ship takes damage, when you fail a saving throw, right? I'm hit. I fail my toughness test. I now take 1 damage. Most guns default at 1 damage. Some guns, their special ability is that they do more than 1 damage. But if I fail a saving throw, I pick one of my systems to take damage. So let's say, let's get rid of the flux accumulator. Okay, I take damage there. Now I can keep using this weapon because it's not fully destroyed. But once I apply a point of damage to one system, any future hits I take, and if I fail the saving throw, I have to keep putting damage here. It's kind of like if you have a squad of guys that have toughness 3, once one takes a wound, you have to keep applying damage to that model until it's destroyed. So the next damage I take will go on the flux accumulator. Once all of these squares are filled in, I no longer have access to this piece of equipment. It has been destroyed. So now I only have my front-facing gun, my turret, and my destruction engram. Maybe I get hit again. Well, I don't want to lose all my guns. Notice your turret can never be destroyed. No matter how much damage you take, you always have a gun. There's no such thing as a ship that has no weapons whatsoever. But I want to keep a side or another facing, so I take some more damage. Uh-oh, the destruction engram is gone. I no longer have access to this. But how cool is this? It's not just your army list and all your rules, it's your damage tracker. So if you've marked your fleet well enough, and you've got this, either you could print it off and use a pencil to check the marks, or if you have this on tablet or your phone, you can add and subtract these as you want. So this is one of the reasons why I love Army Forge. It's great for building the army, and in Warfleets, it's your damage tracker. Now, how awesome is that? Okay, a couple more things. Let's head over here and look at some of these other ships. Let's put in a light ship here. So notice there's that little icon letting us know we haven't filled in all of our upgrades. We only have 2 because it's a light ship. But notice as a light ship, its move is faster. It moves 6. The Dolman only moves 4. Its cruise is 9. The Dolman's is 6. And its evasion is 4. This thing's harder to hit. But if it does take a hit, I save on a 4+ instead of a 3. It still has a turret. Its turret, however, is a shorter range. 12 inches as opposed to 18. It has 2 attacks, whereas this has 2 attacks, but it has no AP. It's a very weak weapon. So let's just, for simplicity's sake, let's just pick 2 random upgrades here. We've now got our next ship. We've got a total of 130 points out of 300. We still have room for several more ships. Let's add in a squadron, because squadrons are kind of unique here. Now, I'm going to put in this spider robot squadron, because if you'll notice, these ones have a move of 0. And I don't want to use this video to go into the details of Blink. That's their movement, and this isn't a Robot Legion video, this is a Warfleets video. So let's add the Robot Squadron here. So we come down to it. It's got a move, cruise, it's a lot faster. It moves 8, it cruises 12, its evasion is 5. This thing's almost impossible to hit, but it can't save worth beans. It has a turret with a very short range. Squadrons have to get in very, very close. And then, if you'll notice, when we click on it, there's no upgrades. Right? It's very rare that your squadrons have any kind of upgrades. They come stock. But if you're going to have multiple squadrons, you're still going to want to mark them, whether by color, by number, whatever. How you want to do that, again, that's totally up to you. Now, notice when we come up here to the Army view. All right, we've got our medium ship, so we don't need to talk about that one. And the light ship looks very much the same, just not as many boxes, but the squadron doesn't have any boxes. Every squadron defaults at 2 wounds. You almost treat your squadrons like a model you would in Grimdark Future. It's out there on the table, it's got a base, it has 2 damage, and it can use all of its weapons. These stats do not change, but once it takes its 2nd point of damage, then it's knocked out. So, that's pretty much all you need to be able to work the ins and outs here of Army Forge with Warfleets. So, by all means, take a break from watching YouTube, head on over to the Army Forge, start playing around, because you'll notice these are some very different special rules here that you haven't seen in Grimdark Future. So once you think you want to play a game of Warfleets, definitely take some time to start studying the army list, because it is a very different game, very different special rules, and you're going to need some time to get used to them before you play on the tabletop. That's why I would highly recommend your first game being a very small one, few points, because each ship has a lot of stuff that you need to keep in mind while you're running the game. So that's the Army Forge. Pretty simple, huh? Well, that's it for this video. In the next one, we'll take a look at gameplay, and we're going to cover all of the rest of the rules and changes, so it might be a longer video, but once it's done, you'll be ready to play Warfleets. I'll see you then.